Clara had always thought her life was steady and predictable, a small, comfortable rhythm that suited her just fine. Mornings spent sipping coffee while Thomas read the newspaper, afternoons quiet with household chores or a book in her lap, evenings filled with simple conversation and shared dinners. But all of that changed the day Elise arrived, a young woman with a warm smile and a polite, soft-spoken manner, hired by Thomas to help around the house because he had insisted that managing everything alone had become too much, and though Clara had hesitated, feeling a twinge of unease at the thought of someone new in their home, she agreed, hoping it would ease the load. Yet the first time she saw Elise and Thomas together, a flicker of something strange passed between them, a small glance that lingered longer than expected, a laugh shared that was softer and warmer than usual, and Clara felt her stomach twist in an unfamiliar way, a mix of curiosity and unease that she couldn't ignore, noticing subtle things like the way Thomas's shoulders relaxed when Elise entered a room, or how he remembered tiny details about her day that he hadn't shown interest in with anyone else, and though she told herself it was nothing, that maybe it was just her imagination or the natural politeness of a new employee, the seed of doubt had been planted, and that evening, as she washed dishes in the quiet kitchen, she could hear faint laughter from the living room, muffled but unmistakably Thomas's, and it made her pause, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to focus on the task, feeling a pang of something she couldn't name, a mix of worry, confusion, and fear that her life might be subtly shifting without her knowing. And when she went to bed that night, the quiet house seemed heavier than usual, the shadows in the corners of the room stretching longer, as if echoing her unease, and when Thomas didn't come down for breakfast the next morning, leaving only a brief note that said, "We need to talk tonight," her heart sank, the words simple but loaded with an ominous weight, filling her mind with endless questions about what could be happening behind closed doors, who Elise really was beyond the polite smiles, and whether her marriage, which had felt steady and comforting, might be entering a new, uncertain phase that Clara was not yet prepared to understand. And as the day passed slowly, each sound from the living room or the hallway made her jump, each glance from Thomas a puzzle she couldn't solve, and even simple routines, like making tea or checking the mail, carried a tension she had never known, a nervous anticipation that something unspoken hung over the house, and by the time evening came, Clara was exhausted from her own racing thoughts, imagining all sorts of possibilities, replaying the moments she had observed and questioning her own judgment, yet still holding on to the hope that nothing serious had occurred, that perhaps Thomas simply wanted to discuss mundane matters or clarify something trivial, though deep down, she felt a knot in her chest, a warning that this evening might mark a turning point in her life, one where the comfortable predictability she had cherished could be forever altered. And as the sun dipped below the horizon and the room darkened, she sat quietly, staring at the note Thomas had left, tracing the words with her fingers, her mind a whirlwind of memories, suspicions, and unspoken fears, wondering how the night would unfold, what truths would be revealed, and whether the life she had built with Thomas would remain the same or be reshaped by revelations she was not yet ready to face, her heart beating faster with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation, the familiar walls of her home suddenly feeling strange and charged with tension, the quiet hum of the evening amplifying every small sound, every creak of the floorboards, every faint whisper of wind through the windows, and Clara realized with a sinking feeling that nothing in her life would feel ordinary again, that this night held the promise of change, a subtle, irreversible shift that she could sense in the air, in Thomas's absence from breakfast, in Elise's gentle presence, and in the heavy silence that seemed to press against her, leaving her both anxious and strangely alert, ready for whatever truths the night would bring, and knowing that by morning, her life might be completely different from the calm, predictable routine she had once relied on. The day stretched long and heavy for Clara, each minute dragging like a slow tide, her thoughts tangled in a web of worry and confusion, as she watched Thomas move through the house with an unusual quietness, avoiding her gaze, speaking softly only when necessary, and it made her heart ache because the man she had married, the man who had always been her anchor in life, now seemed distant, distracted, and almost unreachable, and every glance he cast, every pause before he answered her questions, made her wonder if he was hiding something deeper than mere fatigue or the stress of work. While Elise moved through the rooms with a graceful ease, polite and careful, yet there was an unspoken comfort she offered Thomas, the kind of warmth that drew him in and made his shoulders relax, his laugh softer when she was nearby, and Clara felt a twist in her chest every time she noticed it, a sting of jealousy mixed with curiosity, trying to convince herself that it was nothing, that she was imagining things because she wanted to believe her marriage was safe, yet the signs were there in the small gestures, the exchanged smiles, the subtle attention Thomas gave to Elise that he no longer gave to her, and Clara could not help but replay every interaction in her mind, questioning whether her love was enough, whether she had unknowingly let a distance grow between them over the months, a quiet gap that had gone unnoticed until now, and she felt the weight of fear pressing down on her, the thought that something she had never imagined could happen in her own home might be unfolding, making her heart race and her stomach twist, and she found herself walking through the hallways more often, listening carefully to voices and footsteps, analyzing laughter and tone, as if decoding a language she didn't yet fully understand, and in these moments, she realized how fragile her sense of security had become, how easily a small change, the arrival of someone new, could ripple through the life she had built, making her question everything she had taken for granted, from the comfort of shared meals to the quiet conversations in the evenings, now replaced with subtle tensions and unspoken emotions, and as the day wore on, Clara tried to maintain her composure, performing her daily routines while her mind raced, every creak of the floorboard, every quiet murmur of conversation, feeding the unease that had settled deep in her chest, until evening came and Thomas returned later than usual, his eyes avoiding hers, his tone unusually soft, almost hesitant, and when he finally sat across from her, he began to speak in a voice barely above a whisper, telling her that there were feelings and thoughts he had been hiding, confessions he struggled to express, fears about their relationship that had been growing quietly, and although his words were careful, they carried a weight that made Clara's heart ache, realizing that their marriage, once steady and predictable, was now entering a space of uncertainty, of delicate emotions that required honesty, patience, and courage to navigate, and as Thomas spoke of his loneliness, his confusion, and the emotional closeness he had felt toward Elise in moments he didn't fully understand, Clara listened, her own heart torn between hurt and empathy, struggling to process the complex mix of fear, sorrow, and the faint glimmer of understanding that sometimes love was tested in ways that didn't involve betrayal but instead revealed vulnerabilities, and in that quiet living room, as the shadows grew longer with the fading light outside, Clara felt an emotional storm inside her, waves of doubt crashing against memories of laughter and shared dreams, yet beneath it all, a small spark of hope that perhaps these confessions, painful as they were, could lead to a deeper connection, a stronger foundation if they were willing to face the truth together. And just as she began to accept the need for patience and open hearts, there was a soft knock at the door, and Elise appeared, holding a note in her delicate hands, her eyes gentle but serious, and Clara's breath caught as she read the simple words, "Some truths are harder to forget than you think," and in that moment, the air shifted, the tension thickened, and Clara realized that the night ahead would not be simple, that emotions, misunderstandings, and unspoken feelings were all converging in their home, and that every choice, every conversation, every gesture from here on out could change the course of their marriage forever, leaving her heart pounding with anticipation, worry, and a fragile sense of hope that, despite the challenges, love might still find its way through the uncertainty and heartbreak, guiding them toward understanding and perhaps a renewed closeness she had thought was lost. That night, Clara could hardly sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of Thomas's confession and the note from Elise, the quiet house around her seeming both familiar and strangely unfamiliar, every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound making her heart jump as if warning her that everything she had believed about her life might be changing, and in the morning, she moved through her routines with a tense awareness, noticing every glance exchanged between Thomas and Elise, every small gesture that spoke volumes even when words were not spoken. The house now filled with an invisible tension that made Clara feel both cautious and strangely alert, aware that emotions she had once thought settled were now bubbling beneath the surface. And as she prepared breakfast, Thomas entered the kitchen, offering a tentative smile that did not reach his eyes, and she sensed the weight of unspoken feelings pressing between them, a mixture of guilt, fear, and longing that neither had fully expressed, and Clara realized that understanding Thomas's heart, and her own, would require patience, honesty, and courage, because love, she now knew, was not about ignoring feelings or pretending everything was perfect. It was about facing discomfort, confronting mistakes, and allowing vulnerability to exist without judgment. And when they finally sat together in the living room that evening, Thomas's voice was low and steady, filled with the careful emotion of a man grappling with his own confusion, as he spoke about how Elise's presence had made him reflect on what he had taken for granted in their marriage, how her laughter, attentiveness, and quiet kindness had stirred feelings that were more about longing for connection than betrayal, how he had realized that his love for Clara had never diminished. But the comfort of routine had masked the need for emotional honesty and intimacy, and as Clara listened, tears forming in her eyes, she felt a swirl of emotions: hurt, relief, empathy, and a faint hope that perhaps this difficult moment could be a turning point, an opportunity to rebuild trust and rediscover the closeness that had once defined their relationship. And yet, just as she thought she was beginning to understand and forgive, Elise appeared once more, standing at the doorway with a quiet dignity, her eyes soft but serious, and Clara could feel the gravity of her presence, the subtle reminder that emotions were complex and that people outside the marriage could influence hearts in ways neither could control. And Elise's voice, gentle and calm, offered no accusation, only a simple statement: "I never wanted to come between anyone, but some bonds are stronger than circumstances." And Clara felt a shiver of recognition that while no betrayal had occurred, the emotional entanglement had already left a mark, a lesson that love required awareness, communication, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. And as the night deepened, Clara and Thomas spoke for hours, sharing fears, memories, regrets, and hopes, each sentence revealing layers of trust that had been hidden beneath daily life, each pause filled with the weight of acknowledgement, of understanding that their marriage had weathered more than they realized, and that moving forward would demand patience, tenderness, and a willingness to see each other clearly, without illusions. And as the clock ticked past midnight, Clara finally allowed herself a moment to breathe, feeling a fragile relief that despite the fear and confusion, they were facing their emotions together, holding space for honesty and healing. Yet she also knew that the journey was far from over, that tomorrow would bring new challenges, subtle reminders of vulnerabilities, and the ongoing task of rebuilding intimacy, of transforming the lessons of emotional closeness, confusion, and longing into a stronger, more resilient bond. And in the quiet darkness, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope, her heart heavy but open, ready to face whatever truths awaited them, knowing that love was not simple, but worth every moment of struggle, reflection, and care, and that while the path ahead was uncertain, the willingness to understand, forgive, and nurture each other might just lead them through the storm, closer and more connected than they had ever been before. Yet the presence of the note from Elise, now resting on the table, a silent reminder that some emotions could not be erased, added a lingering tension, a subtle whisper that life's complexities would always test them. And Clara realized with clarity that true love was not about perfection or absence of temptation, but about resilience, communication, and the courage to navigate the messy, beautiful, and unpredictable landscape of human hearts together, fully aware that the decisions and emotions of this night would shape the future of their relationship in ways they could not yet fully imagine, leaving her with a heartbeat full of anxiety, anticipation, and the delicate hope that the journey of healing and understanding had only just begun. As dawn slowly crept through the curtains, Clara sat by the window, watching the quiet street below, feeling as if the night had reshaped her heart, because something inside her had shifted from fear to clarity. And when Thomas joined her, rubbing his tired eyes, there was no distance left to hide behind, only two people facing the truth of their shared life, and without anger or blame, they spoke again, this time with calm voices and open hearts, admitting how routine had slowly replaced effort, how silence had taken the place of affection, and how both of them had unknowingly allowed emotional space to grow between them. And Clara realized that Elise had not created the problem but had revealed it, like a mirror reflecting what had been missing for too long. And when Thomas promised to choose honesty over avoidance and presence over habit, Clara felt a cautious warmth return to her chest, not blind trust but something deeper and more real. And later that morning, Clara spoke privately with Elise, whose eyes carried both relief and sadness, and Elise explained that she never intended to cause pain, that she had only offered kindness without realizing how deeply it could affect hearts already fragile, and with quiet dignity, she made the decision to leave the job. Not out of guilt but out of respect, understanding that some bonds needed space to heal, and as she packed her things, the house felt lighter, not because a person was leaving, but because clarity had arrived, and in the days that followed, Clara and Thomas began again in small but meaningful ways, sharing meals without distractions, walking together in the evenings, learning how to speak honestly even when words felt uncomfortable, and they laughed again, not because everything was perfect, but because they were trying, and Clara noticed how Thomas looked at her now, not with assumption but with intention. And she responded in kind, choosing connection over fear, and though memories of doubt still surfaced at times, they no longer ruled her thoughts, because trust was being rebuilt slowly, brick by brick, through effort and understanding, and weeks later, as they stood in the kitchen one quiet night, cooking together, Clara realized that love did not mean never being tested, it meant staying when the test came, choosing growth over escape, and while their story had been marked by confusion and emotional strain, it had also led them to a deeper version of themselves and each other, and as Thomas reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, Clara felt a steady calm replace the old anxiety, knowing that their marriage was no longer based on habit but on choice, and though life would always bring uncertainty, they had learned how to face it together, with open eyes and open hearts, understanding that sometimes a single moment can change everything overnight, not by breaking love apart, but by showing it what it truly needs to survive and grow stronger than before.